again.
Welcome to the first meeting of the members standing members standards committee. To all of you here and to those of you watching live on stream. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from councillors Leung, S. Taylor and Robertson.
Declarations of interest. Declarations.
None.
Right, item 3 then, the terms of reference. I'd point out that this actually is for noting only. We're not supposed to change it. Can you run us through it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is simply as the first meeting of this committee. So as members will recall, there used to be an audit and member standards committee, but on the recommendations of SIPFA, they were split into 2 separate committees. So as this is the first meeting of the committee, we've just included the terms of reference with the report, with the agenda. So it sets out the as I say, the terms of reference, and also notes that the members of this committee also sit on 2 important subcommittees, one being the review subcommittee, and a complainant, someone who's made a complaint can request a review of a decision made by myself in consultation with the independent person, and that review subcommittee would carry out that review. And I can also refer my delegations back to that committee. So I have delegated authority to carry out a review of complaints when they first come in. I sometimes will ask that review subcommittee to look at that in a complex situation, and also where I want to seek guidance from members, for example, when I'm looking to set a threshold, etc. So those are the 2 circumstances when that committee might meet. And the other subcommittee that members of this committee sit on is the assessment subcommittee, which is effectively a hearings committee. So at the end of an investigation, when an investigation report has been submitted, that committee would meet to consider the findings and any sanctions that it might think should be levied. And then we simply go on to list the functions of the committee, the delegations where they exist, and then the support for the committee in terms of my function and Chris as Deputy Monitoring Officer, and the independent person and what his responsibilities are. So it's a full information report, Chairman.
I'll go through it item by item so you can make any comments there. Item 1, item 2, 3, 4, 5, which is quorum.
The quorum, Chair, 3 is a very small number. You know, I know it's a quarter of the membership, but you know, it's a very small number when we're dealing, or possibly dealing in the future, with issues around member conduct. I just wonder whether have, you know, a higher level of attendance to make sure that there's a fairness across any decision making.
The same thought did occur to me, but as we were only supposed to be noting it, I didn't sort of raise it at all. But have you any comment on that one?
In terms of if you was considering a complaint against a member, that would be, it wouldn't be this group, it would be the assessment sub or the review subcommittee.
Okay. And can I ask, Chair, there's a separate quorum for membership of those committees?
That would be the standard as a third of members.
A third of the members of a subcommittee would be a very, very small number.
Yeah, we could. I mean, it would require a change to the constitution, but that can be made. So if we want to insert a minimum number that's above the standard quorum.
Chair, I'm not sure I've got the temerity to change the constitution unilaterally, but I think it's something that ought to be considered in any updates of the constitution. And I know Councillor Pullen's looking at that. So, you know, if that could be noted as a particular issue, I think it would be helpful, because it is particularly sensitive when members' conduct is being
The quorum
reviewed
for
and
the
assessed.
subcommittee is actually 3 as well, Sue, so
Which is very small.
it's not a third of the 4 and the 5,
No,
it is 3 for each of those subcommittees.
It should probably be an absolute number rather than a percentage. I would.
Chair, can I just confirm, would you like us to investigate quorum for this overarching committee as well as those subcommittees, or just the subcommittees?
I think so, personally, I think so.
Just so we-
I mean, I can't imagine it happening. I don't think I've ever been to a committee meeting here which hasn't been quorate. One was very close, I know, but you know, it's just ensuring that there is that sort of breadth of opinion, really.
Because as you say, yeah, it's the quorum's 3. So the assessment sub comprises of 5 members usually. So that could go down to a minimum of 3. The review subcommittee.
It would still go down
4
to
and
3.
that goes down to 3. Yeah.
I think the one is the main member standards committee only being 3. I would hope that we'd never reach that stage, because we have 11 people on the
I mean, in terms of, I think Councillor Woodward's concern that you're making a judgment on a member and potentially levying a sanction, that would be done by the assessment sub. So that sits with 5 members, and that could go down to 3 members. But as you also note, we are doing a review of the constitution.
Yes.
So that can be one of the things on the list of things to look at.
Factored in, that would be helpful, I think. Thank you.
Councillor Norman, you
Two points on the assessment subcommittee. One is that I think you find out from members if they can make a meeting, they have a choice of date. I think that's what happened. So there's less chance of that happening. And also, let's be honest, it is the most interesting committee. Reason I don't have to explain apparently. So, but still, you know.
It's true. I mean, yeah, the governance will make absolutely certain that the date is chosen where the most members can attend.
It's possible to think of a situation where a lot of people are on holiday and the rest are down with flu or something.
Well, come back off holiday for one of those. The other side.
did that. Item 6, assessment subcommittee. Item 7, review subcommittee. Page 4, the functions of the committee. Sorry.
There's some practical advice, please, because one of the functions, quite a way down, 2/3 of the way down, is to ensure that arrangements are put in place for keeping and updating the register of members' interests. It would be helpful to have some practical guidance about how that could happen, because, you know, the vast majority of councillors would want to make sure that their register of interests are kept up to date, but perhaps need reminding it periodically to do that.
Query on that later on, where it says that it should be updated quarterly, and I don't remember updating mine quarterly.
And the next one is the one down from that, advising on training for councillors, parish councillors and co-opted members. How do we do that as a practical step? Do we bring suggestions to this committee, or just run it past you as chair and your vice chair? How do we practically advise on training? I've got a particular issue with GDPR training, for example, because I think members, because of the variety of IT equipment they've got and the accessibility, therefore, to the GDPR training, it's not always easy for them to log on and continue through. And it might be easier or better or more accessible for members to have an in-person session where they're being advised and guided by staff to work their way through that GDPR training. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, and that might be helpful too.
I interpreted that as being co-opted members onto some of the parish councils, because some of the parish councils have unelected members on them because they haven't been had enough people.
How do we do that? So
Hmm?
what are the practical steps to enable us to do that?
That point there, it does say at the end specifically relating to the code of conduct. So it's about training on the code of conduct, which I think the monitoring officer is going to go through in the next item. But I take your point about member training in general. And I will discuss with my line manager, the same person, on how best we can actually do that, and actually how we get those ideas from you and we can start putting them into some sort of practical plan.
Because, yeah, through your chair, the GDPR is obviously an audit committee function, so it may well be through the audit training plan that we address that. So, yeah.
The audit training plan is usually for audit committee members rather than the wider membership.
Yeah. But they should be having the overview of the organisation as a whole, and if they feel the members are not adequately trained or comfortable with something, then I think we would address that through that training.
Chair, through you, if I can just say to Mark that I have raised some concerns and some suggestions with the chair of audit committee, so hopefully that will be in the system, because you know there was a fair amount of social media discussion, shall we say, about the low percentage of councillors who'd gone through GDPR training, but I think there was a less understanding about how difficult it is to access from remotely from various types of IT equipment, and so that's a suggestion in order to increase the take up of the GDPR training.
Yeah, and I also think that general training is perhaps not as tailored to members as it could be.
No.
I'd also suggest that training for the codes of conduct, add town and parish clerks to those to be trained so that they can exercise some oversight locally.
Yeah, through you, Chair, if I could ask a question back, if I'm allowed. The parish network, in fact, because I just know that Councillor Woodward has some expertise in the parish network, and that may be possibly something that we could address the training needs of parishes through.
In fact, it's an item on the next agenda for the parish network training needs, and I've got to remember now that that's one of the ones that you've suggested, so I will try.
Anything else on the functions? Okay. Page 5, then the monitor officer. And the independent person. And that's the end of the.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the independent person, just to go through, we do have a very good independent person who was invited to this meeting, but unfortunately he was already on leave. I have the agreement of the chair that although he isn't required to come to these meetings because he's there more for investigations, I still think it would be nice for him to be invited and hopefully attend, and he does wish to attend because he'd like to get to know you all, obviously ready for if the time ever came that you are sitting on one of those subcommittees together.
I'd support that.
Right. Can we note that?
Thank you.
In terms of reference, and we'll go on to the next item, which is the review of the code of conduct. Can you take us through that as well, Mark, please?
Indeed, if I'm just no,
it's coming up. There you go, it's come up.
You go straight to the.
Just test this as well.
You go straight to that bit, not the preamble. No.
Sorry, if you can bear with us, we did have some problems earlier with it's connected via the alternative.
It's the way. You shared that.
If you stop sharing.
Can't stop sharing because you've done. There you go. You can just
Right,
click on
yeah.
that.
thank you,
Hopefully that
thank you.
works.
Right,
Just to be clear, sorry, through Chair, we're going straight to that. We're not going to the.
I was going, I was just putting.
We're getting ready. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly right.
Introduce.
Sorry.
No, I was just to say that one of the roles of this committee is to review and make recommendations on the member code of conduct. And at this first meeting, it's perhaps opportune that the committee considers whether it wishes to recommend the adoption of the LGA model code of conduct. I just thought it might be helpful if at the outset I outline the background to the model code, why it was introduced, the principles that underpin it, and then the standards that it contains. So the Committee on Standards in Public Life actually yes, there was a spoiler earlier, and recommended the introduction of an updated model code, councillor code of conduct back in January 2019. And why did it do this? It wanted to create consistency across England. It wanted to reflect the common expectations of the public and to reduce the potential for confusion amongst dual-hatted and triple-hatted councillors, where you've got a situation where a single member could be operating under 3 different codes of conduct, potentially. And then also areas such as gifts and hospitality, social media use, bullying and harassment, they've all increased in salience over recent years, but many of the older codes don't specifically refer to them, ours included. So the LGA was asked to draft a code of conduct, and following extensive consultation, the LGA model code was introduced in December 2020, and then guidance followed in July 2021. And it's quite extensive guidance, and I've included a link to that in the committee report. So the code states that its purpose is as follows: to assist councillors in modelling expected behaviour, to provide a personal check and balance, to set out the type of conduct that could lead to action being taken, and also to protect councillors, public officers, and the reputation of local government. Now, the code's underpinned by 2 sets of principles. One is the Nolan principles, and the other a set of principles that were developed specifically for councillors. And a quick recap of the Nolan principles, and these underpin both our existing code and the model code. And then the principles that were developed specifically for councillors: I act with integrity and honesty, act lawfully, I treat all persons fairly and with respect, I lead by example and act in a way that secures public confidence in the role of councillor. And then the second set, which is included, I impartially exercise my responsibilities in the interest of the local community. I do not improperly seek to confer an advantage or disadvantage on any person. I avoid conflicts of interest. I exercise reasonable care and diligence, and I ensure that public resources are used prudently in accordance with the local authorities' requirements and the public interest. And it's important to note these are principles, these aren't intended to be rules, but they are later translated into the standards that are in the code. But otherwise they're useful for guidance and also for interpretation of the standards that come later. It's important to know when the code actually applies, and it applies when you're acting in your capacity as a councillor, and that's based in section 27.2 of the Localism Act 2011, and that applies irrespective of whatever code is adopted. And there's a useful test also in the code as to when might it be applying. Would your actions give the impression to a reasonable member of the public with a knowledge of all the facts that you're acting as a councillor? So it's a reasonable perception test, if you like. And then there's a list of the types of communications that the code might apply to, you know, all various types of communication. I'd just draw attention to social media on that list because it's explicitly now covered in the code, and it can often be the main source of complaints in many local authorities. And it's also thankfully covered in guidance, which is available from the LGA. And then there's a statement: you're expected to uphold high standards of conduct and show leadership at all times when acting as a councillor. So a general statement. And tied in with that is where you might find sources of advice. So your monitoring officer has statutory responsibility for the implementation of the Code of Conduct. So there's no hiding place for the MO. And town and parish councillors are encouraged to seek advice from their clerk, who may refer matters to the monitoring officer. And I would endorse that principle that matters are resolved at the local level wherever possible before being escalated. And then we come to the standards in the code. There's 10 standards intended to be minimum standards. And a failure to, falling short of the standards could lead to a complaint being made and potentially action being taken. And the first of these is respect. I treat other councillors and members of the public with respect. I treat local authority employees and representatives of partner organisations and volunteers with respect and respect the role they play. And there's a lot of commentary in the guidance on respect. I think just a couple of points that I'd raise. One, it applies to behaviour, spoken word and the written word. And secondly, it's not intended to, and nor does it inhibit, how should we term it, lively or passionate political debate. There are specific and enhanced protections for political speech, and any application of the code would need to take those into account. The next of the standards is bullying and harassment and discrimination. I do not bully any person. I do not harass any person. I promote equalities and do not discriminate against any person. And again, there's commentary and there's definitions, etc. In the guidance. For example, an isolated incident might not constitute bullying, but a series of such incidents may well do so. And the third, impartiality of officers. I do not compromise or attempt to compromise the impartiality of anyone who works for or on behalf of the local authority. There's almost exactly the same wording in our current code. And it also links directly to the member officer protocol, which it forms part of the Constitution. Confidentiality and access to information, that's all about the appropriate handling of information. So it's about handling confidential information appropriately, but also not inhibiting access to information that should be in the public realm. Fifth is disrepute. I do not bring my role or my local authority into disrepute. So, where a member might be over social media, let's say, accusing another member with unfounded allegations of fraud in his local authority dealings, that could well be a breach of the disrepute, because it could be bringing the wider authority into disrepute. And likewise, sometimes it might be somebody bringing their role rather than the whole of the authority into disrepute, but either way, it's a breach of the code. And the sixth standard is use of position. I do not use or attempt to use my position improperly to the advantage or disadvantage of myself or anyone else. And there's also the seventh is the use of local authority resources and facilities. I do not misuse local authority resources, and I will use them in accordance with the local authority's requirements and not for sort of purely political purposes. And then complying with the Code of Conduct, I undertake standards training, and was this, were this code to be adopted, we would be arranging obviously comprehensive training shortly afterwards. I cooperate with any standards investigations and or determination. I don't intimidate anybody involved in an investigation or proceedings, and I comply with any sanction imposed. Then the ninth is interests. I register and disclose my interests. And there are three types of interests mentioned. There's disclosable pecuniary interests, which are the statutory ones, other registrable interests, and then non-registrable interests. The third being, cover perhaps other family members and close friends. So if a matter came up a committee that concerned a property of a close friend, that property wouldn't have needed to be put on any register, but it would obviously be an interest, so it would have to be declared. And then the 10th of the standards is gifts and hospitality. I do not accept gifts and hospitality irrespective of value, which could give rise to gain or concern. I've summarised that a bit. It's some of these are a bit longer in your pack, though, just to get them on the slide. I register any gift or hospitality of £50 or more with a monitoring officer within 28 days. So that's the same as in our existing code of conduct. And I register with a monitoring officer any significant gift or hospitality I've been offered but rejected. So we can see there's an emphasis on perception as much as on sort of financial limits.
Just interrupt, is the rejected a new thing, or is that was
Rejected isn't in our current code? No, you don't have to register that. Yeah. So that's basically, that's a very quick whistle stop tour of the overview of the model code of conduct. I think all I would say about the adoption is that when the LGA did a survey last year in 2023, something like 63%, I think it is, of local authorities that responded that adopted the model code of conduct, either in total or in part. And then they did a spot check to try and work out how many they thought overall, and they probably something like 54% of local authorities at that time had adopted it. And then within Staffordshire, I've been told that 4 authorities have adopted it, and plus the county council. Not that the county council noticed there's some difference with the interests in their adoption, but it's the bulk of it is the moral code. Parishes, we asked the parishes, I think 10 responded, and of those 6 had adopted the model code. So I think it's safe to say it's a progression rather than a revolution from our existing code. I mean, a lot of similarities. I think the existing code is pretty much the principles, but it hasn't then gone on to develop the standards, and that's what the model code does. And it takes some of the ambiguity out of applying the code, if you like, and maybe some of the subjectivity out of applying the code. I think that's probably all that I'd say for now, Chair, but happy to, obviously, at the appropriate time to answer any questions.
Can you just stop sharing?
I understand that Councillor Pullen wishes to say a few words to us before we actually start going through it.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
I just say, Chair, I think I ought to declare an interest because I'm a local government association PM member. It may be perceived that I have a bias towards the local government association obligation.
Thanks, Chair.
Of course I don't.
I took a real interest in this. I know a while back it was mooted that we adopt this model code from the LGA. At the time, I was vehemently against it because, in my purist mind, I thought that actually having a set of principles to adhere to was far better than getting into a detailed set of rules and regulations, which frankly I didn't believe was required. I think on reflection, that might have been slightly too purist of me, and actually I think having that set of principles actually gives rise to ambiguity and grey areas, well, I don't think particularly helped by case law, which basically says unless you're standing there with a badge on saying I am a councillor, and what I'm about to say is me saying it as a councillor, the code of conduct almost doesn't apply, and I really don't think that's particularly helpful. I think we'd probably all agree in here, you're a councillor, it's 24/7 really, and unless it's in the sort of course of your business dealings, you are a councillor. You don't need to shout out I am a councillor before you do something for the code of conduct to bite. So I suppose it was really just I came to listen to the debate this evening, but also to say, both in my role as leader of the council, but also as a group leader, having that code of conduct perhaps with slightly more meat on the bones, I think will actually help us all adhere to those principles in a far better and more consistent way that perhaps we'd expect the code of conduct that we've currently got to apply, but I think doesn't, frankly, because of the way that previous case law has interpreted it, which means that it really doesn't have much teeth currently stands today. That was all, Chair. Thank you for letting me come and speak. There's more to listen to the debate.
Chair, if I can just respond as leader of the principal opposition group. I would absolutely agree with Councillor Pullen that, you know, it's about the protection of the councils and councillors' reputations, and while the vast majority will adhere to the proper standards, which we'd all accept as standards of like civil behaviour, it's much easier to have this sort of codified, and in terms of the recommendations, I would recommend that we do adopt this code. I'd had a prior discussion, including with Mr. Hooper, about, you know, whether there were some tweaks that were needed, but on reflection, I don't think there are. And I think from my perspective, it would be helpful for all concerned, both the residents out there and for the members of the council and staff to adopt this model code.
Agreed. I'd also add that this is bringing the scope of standards up to date in terms of social media, as you say, bullying, harassment, this kind of thing, things which are not explicitly covered in the current code and should be.
I'll now go through the code item by item, out the executive summary, because the recommendation is that we consider the adoption of the code of conduct, and that the recommendation of the committee be submitted to full council. We're going through it. Background 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, 3.10, 3.11, 3.12, 3.13. General principles. Application of conduct, code of conduct. 3, the standards of conduct.
Would you say there, Chair? I've just highlighted the differences with the current code. So just for noting.
3.14, adopting the new code. 3.15, 3.16.
If we were to adopt it, it just confirms that members won't all have to come and sign a new code, that their existing, having signed up to the existing code, it will be carried over to the new code.
Page 11, the only item I've got there is under the equality, diversity and human rights. There's a typing error. It should say duty, not duct. And page 12.
Chair, do you want the monitoring officer just to confirm training if it were to be adopted? Because that's something we discussed.
Yeah. We did say that if it got the approval tonight, we would start not prejudging a council's decision, because obviously we would be making a recommendation to full council to adopt the code, but we would start making preliminary inquiries as to getting an external trainer to introduce the new model code, somebody who's got experience of how the code's actually been operating in a range of different authorities, and to provide that for all members as soon as possible, should it be adopted by full council.
I think that would be a very useful point to make in full council as well. Training will be available from an experienced trainer.
Yeah.
Appendix A, item 1.
I think, Chair, yeah. So Appendix 1 is the existing code,
Yeah.
and then Appendix B is the new model, just so the committee can see the differences.
Any comments on? Oh, it's good to see then.
Confirming recommendations, I think
Yeah.
the committee are happy for this to be recommended to the council.
Are there any queries on it before we go to the recommendations?
When you get to it, I've got comments to make.
So if we go
Code
to
of conduct.
Appendix B. So
Well, first of all, a few. Change the word, the American spelling of behaviours to behaviours in the English spelling. That's just in the first paragraph. Joint statement. It doesn't repeat itself anywhere else, to say. Probably did actually, because I could be really annoyed then. But it does that first one. So when we do, if we do adopt it, if you can just change that spelling the first time on page 416. Oh, I've got that here. Yeah, when this first came out, I didn't reject it wholly, but I did have some concern about behaviour in the council chamber, that sort of thing, and how that could be interpreted. But I've sort of calmed down a bit since then, and I'm okay with that. We'll have to see how it works in practice. But there's reference there to non-verbal, reference on there as well to non-verbal comments, and I've had a few complaints about me in the past, and I've got very far mine. But one of them was a non-verbal expression that I had, and that was completely misinterpreted, I would argue, by the complainant. So you never know what you might get there. On 716, interest. Now this is an interesting one, because if you get a trainer from Worcestershire, well, I'd love you to do that. They don't seem to have the same register of interest as other councils. Malvern District, or well, we've got Malvern District to look at, and Redditch. In our register of interest and every other register of interest, I see you've got the interest as a councillor and disclose my interest, section 29 of the Local Income Act. And then other registrable, table 2, other registrable interest. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not giving you one, that's everywhere, but other registrable interest. These two councils, I think 3 of them I looked at for a reason I won't go into, but it wasn't to do with it. Yeah. They didn't have the register of those. Is that they were a member of that exercised functions of a public nature or had some influence, or general control, anything like that. In the case of here, I mean, I just had a quick look before tonight, and there's one member who actually hasn't got the register of interest updated on a parish council, another member who's also a member of the district council who's missing an important part of the register of interests. This isn't unusual. I've gone through quite a few in the past, and on our side as well as others, just to say, look, your register is updated. So they're not up to date, a lot of them, and some of them haven't got any at all on the parish council information that we have on the district council. So that training, that urging people to register their interest and to update their things, that would be good. And I'm pretty sure that we mentioned about the clerks, but I'm pretty sure that the clerks would need that help in some of the smaller parishes, or at least be told where to get that help, presumably from NALC or any other Staffordshire organisation. So yeah, that's it. And the last one I think I've got here. Oh yeah, no, on the interest there, when you get in planning, they're known to me. Well, a lot of people are known to me, but I've no interest in them at all, or at least I've got no affection towards them at all. People say they're known to me. I think if they're on a planning committee, it just gets them out having to make a decision, you know. So I just can get that, what that interest is, how it might affect you is the, I think, more important. I mean, obviously, if they're relatives and this sort of thing, you've got to say that if you know that they've got an application, by the way. And the sensitive interest at the bottom there, should lead your person connected with you being subject to violence, intimidation, the interest must not be included. Oh, the reason I got that is because that may change very soon anyway, because the government has suggested they're going to change that for the local government, so that I'm going to go to the palaver I went through, getting my address taken off, otherwise. Yeah. So that might be easier. So keep that in mind, and that might need a review or an update rather at a later stage, if that's what does happen through the LGA and the government. Those are my comments really, but I do support I do support the new code in the end. I wasn't so sure before, but I do now.
Woodward?
I've declared my position in terms of accepting the code, but I just think it's useful to highlight a couple of issues in the code, and one is on page 22. It's about respect and, you know, reinforcing the point that councillors need to be respectful in their dealings with members of the public. But I thought it was also interesting that there we've got, in return, you have a right to expect respectful behaviour from the public. And we know that how much abuse councillors get, and I think Councillor Pullen and myself get more than most. And there is a right to be treated with respect and to ensure that levels of abuse that people receive on social media or any online publications don't go past a particular point. I have to say that I did object to one particular post about me on Lichfield Live, and I'm grateful for them for taking that post down, because I thought it was misogynistic, not just sexist, but misogynistic, and they did take that down. But when comments slip over into personal abuse, I find that really objectionable. Debate is fine, but it's unfortunate that these people don't do it openly and honestly and by direct contact to the councillors, but choose to do it anonymously or through pseudonyms on social media, and that does coarsen the level of debate, and it does threaten our democracy ultimately, because there are many people who might be interested in becoming councillors but won't tolerate the levels of personal abuse that we get. You know, I think it's useful just to highlight that. You know, anybody reading debates on the sale of the Kennings Garage site and the Birmingham Road development, we're all stupid or corrupt or both, and yet, you know, we're supposed to use the information that we have appropriately, and yet, you know, a lot of those commentators haven't even read the report. So that's I'm just expressing a frustration, and perhaps we'll get a bit of abuse tonight on social media. The home addresses, Councillor Norman's just mentioned this, and certainly we've made moves in order to protect some of the more vulnerable councillors. We made a decision as a Labour group certainly to take our home addresses off the internet in order to protect the more vulnerable members, but there has been an announcement on that. But of course, home addresses are often in the register of interest, so I don't know how that's going to be dealt with. You know, you've got to declare your interest in land, property and so on. There may be some future guidance coming out, and I hope so. But the one aspect that I hadn't realised until looking in more detail at the Code of Conduct is the declaration of gifts refused. And, you know, I think often we as councillors are invited to events and meals and goodness knows what, and we've got to be conscious of that too. So that's where the training needs coming, I think. Thanks, Chair.
Any other comments on it from anyone? I had a couple of points I'd made on the page 15, best practice 6. It said we should update the register at least once a quarter. Now, to my knowledge, we haven't been doing that. I've never been asked to update mine. I've never thought to update it quarterly myself either. And the other one was best practice 7. We should have at least 2 independent persons. Do we have 2?
No, we have 1, Chair, and we.
I know they're extremely difficult to.
This is the problem. We did want to appoint 2 at the time. We advertised, and in the end, there was only 1 suitable applicant, which is the one we put forward. But it is something that will be very useful, because at the moment there is no fallback. So it may well be that, yeah, at a different time we re-advertise and see if there is anybody else, you know, because things change, so there may now be somebody else that is available. But yeah, these best practice notes accompany the model code, and as you say, they haven't all been implemented to date, but it was something that we would look to do alongside the code. So as the code is implemented, we would also be implementing these best practice notes. So things like the reminders, etc., would form part of the introduction of the new regime, if you like.
Councillor Norman?
Well, at school, that you get that every year, you're supposed to update it. About the changes where you can this advice. I had to go through all the rigmarole with the town council and school here as well, of course. But I think it was just a reminder to actually check that your register of interest update, which is I think what the Montgomery is saying. That seems a good idea, really. So people might forget that things have changed, or their spouses, or whatever situation has changed. Yeah, but every quarter that seems a bit excessive.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of say that I know mine's not up to date at all. I do have a question, is insofar as how far do you go in terms of declaring an interest? A typical example is that there is a space near to where I live that a lot of people within the area are very concerned about the building of houses on that particular land. My house also adjoins that, but I have to represent those people who have concerns about the land. How do I do that, and how do I declare that? Because there are a lot of people who are actually, objecting and contact me on a regular basis, but I also live there, and I also have a feeling that I don't particularly want them there either, for a lot of reasons. But do I not represent them? How do I declare that as an interest?
It's not an interest for this.
It's not an interest.
If it comes before the planning committee.
It's not an interest in regard to this, is it?
If you was involved,
What is the difficulty he's got?
it wouldn't be a registerable interest, so you wouldn't have to register that interest. It might become an interest if you're sitting on a committee that is making a decision about that piece of land.
Or if you were being compensation for the loss of amenity if the development goes through, then it might be.
Yeah. So you know, different depends what the circumstances are. So, for example, if it's going to have a pecuniary interest on you as the owner of whatever is, if there's a land use planned for that that area, then it obviously becomes a pecuniary interest otherwise. But it's very much dependent. So that in the new code of conduct, that would be one of the what's termed a non-registerable interest. It's not something that has to be registered, but it might be something that you have to declare
At some point.
if it comes up in a meeting.
The point is, if you declare it and then people know, people watching or listening or at the meeting, will know that you've got an interest, even if you don't want one, you have got an interest because you declare it, and they take that into consideration in their discussions. Obviously, it wouldn't work on a planning committee. You'd have to. So that would be my view. If I was you, I'd sort out Fazeley Parish Council's lack of register of interest if I were you when you go. For anybody.
There's also a distinction in that new code about directly relates to as opposed to effects. So, for example, if a member is making a planning application for their property, it obviously directly relates to them. If it's their neighbour, it affects them. And there's a flow chart as part of the paperwork, which is very helpful, I think, in terms of following through what you might wish to declare. And whether it's an interest that you would declare but remain in the room and be able to carry on speaking, or if it's something that you should remove yourself from the debate. But also, case specific, that's one of the reasons I'm here, that we would discuss that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments from anyone? Well, the recommendation, I presume, is that we answers to the full council with the recommendation that it be accepted. All in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending. Good journey home.
That, is it stop?
No, not yet.